Guys, today we'll rank Genshin characters in terms of how much I think they can single-handedly impact an account meta-wise, and so these are the characters I consider to be the 5 best pulls in the game. As a baseline, I will consider the Constellation Zero free-to-play weapon value, but I won't completely ignore that type of investment. Let's go. 5th. Neuvillette. Neuvillette is a pick that might surprise some because after all it's an on-field DPS. Typically, when people argue about who are the best characters to pull in Genshin, they mostly look at strong, versatile supports because they can just fit on more teams than DPS can, and so in that sense they can help an account more. However, I don't care. The reason Neuvillette is on this list is that by pulling him, you're getting a character that has been able to carry teams into all Abyss cycles since his release, bar none, through his sheer OP-ness in terms of damage and gameplay. His presence on the team basically ensures you will be able to clear a side of the Abyss comfortably, granted you fulfill the bare minimum of his conditions. So, to me, he's just as valuable as any of the amazing supports in the game. His bread and butter is, of course, the way he can basically ignore all of the game difficulties by being able to shoot this large horizontal beam that hits every opponent in the room with no fail. His personal damage ceiling isn't higher than other top meta DPS, but the fact he can produce a type of damage very easily, very consistently, and most importantly in a way that hits all the opponents basically always, is what sets him apart as a DPS that won't ever let you down. It goes deeper than that though, because he's also an HP scaling character, and this makes him very durable in combat. His constellations are very good too, especially his Constellation 1, which massively increases his damage on double Hydro teams and also removes the one Constellation 0 flaw in his kit that is the lack of interruption resistance. Having said this, his whale investment potential isn't on the same level of severity as other DPS in the game. His signature is pretty good, but even a Refinement 1 Sacrificial Jade is comparable to it on Furina teams. While Jade isn't a free-to-play weapon since it's a Battle Pass option, it's still a relatively cheap buy that competes with a way higher cost weapon, and that's something other top DPS like Arlecchino can't replicate. So, to me, he's the highest value pull DPS in the game, and that earns him a spot in this list. 4th. Nahida. Out of all the characters in this list, Nahida is probably the one that enables a specific niche the best. The reason is that Dendro teams are kinda their own thing in Genshin, like a different meta completely, and Nahida can enable most of them thanks to how good their Dendro application is. Specifically, the Bloom teams are what make her stand out in this sense, because they're the most free-to-play friendly ones, and so the most easily accessible to the community. Hyper Bloom in particular has been popularized to the point that until the wave of power creep hit us in Fontaine, the sentence "just use Hyper Bloom, hehehe" it was one of the most annoying but still truthful statements one could make. The crux of it is that Hyper Bloom teams are extremely free-to-play friendly compositions because a big chunk of the team damage can be achieved through elemental mastery builds that are pretty easy to maximize. And Nahida is at the core of that because through her application, either off-field or on-field, she can provide an endless supply of Dendro Elemental Gauge at an AoE scale, which then translates to Bloom Course generation. It doesn't end there, however. Nahida is also good on Quicken teams, Burgeon teams, Burning teams, as her combinations of AoE damage, Elemental Mastery buffs, and Dendro application make it really easy for her to slot into most Dendro teams. That said, her limit has been tested recently with the release of attack-scaling Dendro characters like Emily and Kinich that don't benefit from her Elemental Mastery buffs, and so they just prefer other characters in their teams compared to Nahida. She's also not a must on Quicken teams, because those are teams that don't really need that much Dendro application to function, and as a result, the gap between Nahida and other Dendro characters there is pretty thin. Still, by pulling her, you will enable a whole new chunk of meta teams on your account, and this makes her earn the 4th spot in this list. The 3rd place is Furina, but first let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. Furina is a character I bet some people would have expected to be even higher, although 3rd is definitely a respectable spot in my opinion. She's really an amazing character who can primarily provide buffs through her elemental burst, but she can also deal a lot of damage through her elemental skill while also continuously applying Hydro, which is obviously precious for a number of teams. Her buffing is definitely the unique part of her kit, however. As a Constellation Zero, her burst can buff the whole team's damage bonus by a whole 75% when maximized, resulting in the single highest damage bonus buffing tool we have in the game. To achieve this seamlessly, however, she necessitates of the presence of a healer on the team, preferably a team-wide healer. In fact, the burst buffs the team based on points she gains whenever her teammates lose or gain HP, Her Elemental skill will generate a lot of points by itself since it drains the team's HP continuously during its duration, but without a strong healer on the team, it's not possible to make her burst efficient at Constellation 0. Single target healers like Cookie and Bennett work decently, but they require you to execute some very specific rotations because you'd have to heal each character in the team singularly to maximize Furina's stacks. The potential clunkiness with this strategy makes a Constellation 0 Furina look like not much of an upgrade to a character like Yelan when paired with Bennett, excluding cases where Yelan doesn't fit well with your on-field character like on Line or Gaming Vape. Where Furina stands out, however, is when you can use a team-wide healer on team, because in that situation, maximizing her burst becomes trivial and she massively increases the whole team damage. That was the true meta-changing aspect of her release back when she came out, because this effectively meant she gave players a strong reason to add characters like Jean back into their teams. Most team-wide healers were considered weak before Furina came out, because they just didn't have enough offensive aspects to compete with a character like Bennett, but Furina changed this to an extent. Her supportive effects are also noticeable in the builds she enables though. Since her Elemental skill continuously drains the team's HP, she makes it possible for everybody to use the Marachusei artifact set. While the 2-piece effect of the set isn't optimal for everybody, since it only buffs normal and charge attack damage bonus, the 4-piece effect alone is enough to make it a very competitive choice on all characters, since it gives crit rate buffs once the character loses or gains HP. Last but not least, Furina has the best early constellations in the game to me. The Constellation 2 in particular basically triples her burst fanfare points generation, and that makes her much easier to play on teams that don't have team-wide healers. At that point, there is probably not ever a reason to use Yelan over Furina, excluding if you specifically need Yelan's higher Hydra application frequency on a team. Overall, a very strong character that faces fierce competition at Constellation 0 but becomes pretty much uncontested at early Constellation levels. Second, Kazuha. Kazuha is the oldest character in this list, but his kit looks so modern in terms of quality of life and effectiveness that honestly nobody would be surprised if Hoyo released him as a new character. Briefly put, Kazuha is the best Anemo character in the game, and that alone opens the door for a wide array of themes for him, since Anemo is a very plug-and-play element. Thanks to the Verdicem Veneer artifact set alone, Anemo characters can already be very impactful, but Kazuha takes it up a notch to the versatile damage bonus effects he can provide through swords and his grouping effects that are to this day very good in flexibility. The thing with Kazuha compared to somebody like Furina is that his impact feels much more immediate than hers. While Furina needs to have a good healer on team and to build things up properly during the rotation to have an impact that surpasses Yelan's, Kazuha just needs to press his Elemental skill to apply the entirety of his buffs for a relatively long amount of time in a way that clearly surpasses the competition of characters like Sucrose. In fact, while the latter can sort of compete with Kazuha on some teams thanks to her Elemental Mastery buffs, Kazuha just feels much better to use because his whirling capabilities have a wider range and his grouping is much better. So even though the numerical advantage isn't always there, the practical advantage is always noticeable. What I'm trying to say is that, compared to a character like Furina replacing Yelan, I feel like you notice a bigger difference by replacing Sucrose with Kazuha on your teams. Kazuha is however penalized by the fact that Verdicem Veneer set didn't age extremely well in terms of quality of life. Its resistance reduction effects only last for 10 seconds after a swirl, and most importantly, they don't activate for off-field swirls. Compared to more recent stuff, like the Sumero Deepwood set that also works for off-field attacks, this does make Kazuha and Anemo as a whole feel more limited as a support in some scenarios. It's not a big deal if you're playing an on-field carry that can quick swap, but in the opposite case it can be annoying, and it's what made the supports like Chevreuse shine over Kazuha on some teams. Also, since it's an old character, he suffers from the fact that his investment layers are just not up to par to current standards. His signature, Freedom Sworn, is nice when you can take advantage of both the supportive effects he provides, but that's not always the case, since attack percent is useless for somebody like Nuvolette, for example. His Constellation 2 provides a really nice Elemental Mastery buff for the active character if he's within Kazuha's burst, but Elemental Mastery is not always an useful buff, and also you might not always want to use Kazuha's burst in a rotation. Still, his Constellation 0 value is high enough that it is without a doubt one of the best units in the game. First, Shilonen. The latest released Natran character is to me the best pull in the game currently. It's hard to understate the benefits she brings to the meta teams honestly, because her supportive buffs are extremely straightforward. She can reduce resistance on a team-wide scale to a similar level as Verdicem Veneer, but with a longer uptime and far easier setup. She can increase the damage bonus for some characters in the team to a similar level as Kazuha with the Scroll artifact set. On top of that, she has impressive healing effects in her elemental burst, which makes her fit well alongside Furina, and obviously means she can cover 2 roles in one as well, so buffer and healer. Honestly, to me, she really feels like Kazuha Plus in many ways. While she lacks Kazuha's grouping and AoE damage, something that is definitely noticeable when you're facing 3 opponents or more, to me, the benefits she brings to the table in return are more than enough. You only need to use her elemental skill and 2 normal attacks to reduce resistance for the whole team on a 10 meters range for 15 seconds, which is both very quick and also works wonders in multi-wave scenarios where you kill a wave and then you have to face another one somewhere else. In the same scenario, Kazuha needs to switch back on field and swirl the new targets, while also making sure the right element is applied on them, while with Xilonen the effects will just naturally persist. The ease of use aspect also makes her much easier to be used on teams with multiple elements, like Vapor Melt compositions, where there can be around 20 things that can go wrong with an Anemo unit, but with Xilonen, the setup is really as easy as breathing. Basically, she's a character that can match the best we have in the game in terms of supportive effects she can provide, while also feeling incredibly practical and up-to-date to use, and healing on top of that. As I said, compared to Kazuha, she's only really missing the grouping and AoE damage, but I'd argue that the positive things she has going for her in return make up for it. Her investment layers are also just better. Her signature is a more versatile version of Freedom Sworn, since it provides a bigger damage bonus as a whole. Her Constellation 2 gives element-specific buffs, so she won't have the same issue as Kazuha, whereas elemental mastery buffs at Constellation 2 don't benefit a lot of the teams if it's in. So, to me, she's the best pull in the game at Constellation 0, and she also has the investment layers to keep up with other units at higher Constellation level. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe, and also go check the new account review series I started a few days ago. Bye bye.